Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. I'm Susan Call. I'm the events advisor here at Politics and Prose, and on behalf of our owners and our entire staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight for our last in-store event of 2023. But we already have a great lineup of events for next year, plus one more event at 6th and I on December 13th with Liz Cheney. So please take a look at our website and be sure to pick up our holiday shopping guide. Tonight is a good night to begin your holiday shopping. And before we get started, a few familiar housekeeping items. Please remember to silence your cell phones. During the Q&A at the end of the event, we have a microphone right there. If you don't mind stepping up with your question, we're recording this event, so that will enable everyone to hear. We have books behind the register, and there'll be a signing after the event right here. And also, if you don't mind just folding up your chairs and leaning them against something, that would be great. And now I'm very excited to be introducing Mark Chiusano to discuss his incredibly timely new book with the excellent title, The Fabulist, The Lying, Hustling, Grifting, Stealing, and Very American Legend of George Santos. Much of what we know about George Santos is the result of Chiusano's dogged reporting for Newsday, notes Kirkus Reviews, calling it a well-researched book that offers fair warning to anyone who might consider voting for his con man subject. The book is just out this week and getting all sorts of deserved media attention, including an excerpt in Vanity Fair. And Chiusano wrote a great op-ed on the subject for the New York Times a couple weeks ago that ran with the headline, "George Santos is more dangerous than you know." Mark was a columnist and editorial writer at New York Newsday, and he's also impressively a fiction writer whose story collection, Marine Park, received a Penn Hemingway Award honorable mention. His writings appeared in places including McSweeney's, the Paris Review, and the Atlantic. And he will be in conversation tonight with Alex Altman, the executive features editor and deputy Washington bureau chief at Time. Please help me give a warm welcome to Mark Chiusano and Alex Altman.
Thank you guys for coming.
Hey, everybody. Appreciate you being here. So, Mark, I'm not sure that there's anybody who's ever sat in this seat who has worked on a book for months and months and
weeks, really.
Weeks and weeks.
Full weeks.
And managed to have it come out the exact week that's the subject story comes to a head. So I wonder if we could start with the news. Do you have sort of any surprise, any thoughts about the expulsion vote this week or the scheduled expulsion week and the way that Santos has handled it?
I think I've been pretty unsurprised by how he's handled it. This has been kind of his vibe the whole time, right? I write about this in the book, he kind of, posts his way through everything, to use a social media term, but he just kind of blusters his way through everything. And I don't know that that's what he's feeling all the time, because I think he sometimes, for example, I saw him in court, both the first and the second time, actually. If you look at him, he clearly looks upset and nervous and not looking forward to what's coming for him, which really appears to be time in prison. So, he definitely has this internal sense of, horror or at least knowing what's coming. But that's not the face he puts on in public, and it's definitely not what he's putting on right now. He can't get off Twitter Spaces. He just loves that place.
I know, it's been incredible.
Yeah.
So you've been covering him since 2019, before his first run?
2019, it was he told me anyway when I called him that he was launching the campaign that day, even though he happened to be in Florida that day, and we were speaking on phone, and I was in New York.
Yeah. So just a liar from the beginning. But can you talk a little bit about those early encounters and sort of how you came to work on this project?
Yeah. So at the time I was writing for Newsday, which is a Long Island newspaper, and we had this newsletter called The Point, and it was supposed to cover congressional candidates. And so I was, covering a bunch of different campaigns at the time. And, my wife is here somewhere and would attest to this. Long Island congressional candidates, not the most exciting candidates in the world. And they would say the same thing. They like it that way. They want to be just down the middle, raise the flag, vote the way that their constituents want, like straightforward. And that was like who I was writing about. And then you have this guy who, even from the very beginning, has all these weird bits about him. And it was just sort of, it was the gift that kept on giving. There were just so many pieces to write. And we found out even more.
And so he chose not to cooperate with the book, but he cooperated with quite a bit of the reporting that you did of him over the years, but sort of before he was in Congress. What were those encounters like?
Yeah, it was a funny dynamic shift, because in the beginning he kind of needed Newsday, because Newsday is the main paper in the area, and we were one of the few people writing at all about congressional campaigns. So he needed to be in the news. That was kind of what he wanted. And so he was happy to pick up the phone, even when I was sort of writing critical things about him. And it would be a funny dynamic, because he would sort of say that I was always getting it wrong. I whatever I was criticizing him for, I didn't understand. It was this other thing. One little example was during the kind of height of COVID, he had this maskless fundraiser. And this was when people were like being very careful and not everyone was vaccinated yet. And I think there were even at that point restrictions on how many people were supposed to be indoors at once. And I called him about it. I was like, Mr. Santos, like, did you really do this? Like, there's pictures and whatever. And he's like, no. Like, I only took my mask off to eat, and I would put my mask right back on every time I talked to another. I was like, you obviously didn't. Like, I see the picture, And also, like, I've heard that before. I live in the world, Like, we know that you didn't do that. But he just kept saying he did. In that, actually, I'm just remembering now, in that phone call was the time he told me, I was like, so you're running again, obviously? And he said, yeah, second time's the charm, which he was right. It was.
So one of the things sort of that I was struck by in the book, and by the way, if you haven't read the book, you really should. It's absolutely fabulous. But I learned a lot about sort of his early life and sort of formative years. Was there anything that sort of that struck you sort of in the course of your reporting about his upbringing, about his family, that struck you as, if not like a skeleton key, sort of one of kind of the, like a prism to understand this guy and what makes him tick?
Yeah. Well, I guess two things. One is that he lied a lot about his upbringing. So sort of understanding why he chose to lie about certain things was interesting. One of my favorites was he said that he was born at 24 weeks gestation, which could be true. I don't, this is protected by like medical, the records are protected. But I sort of went down a rabbit hole here to try to see how many people were born at 24 weeks gestation in the week he was born. And it's not many, Right. So it's very unlikely. But so then just to think like, okay, why would you say you were born at 24 weeks gestation? And I think it's because he has, on the one hand, this like chip on his shoulder where he wants to sort of explain that he like overcame everything, which he did. I mean, he was not born wealthy and he rose to this pretty high level. He's a member of Congress. So he has this chip on his shoulder that he's dealing with. But at the same time, he wants to pretend to you that he actually was born wealthy and already from this kind of famous family. So it's this weird toggling that he goes between.
Right. I mean, his father's a house painter.
Right.
His mother is a house cleaner, and he's pretending that his mother, was an executive.
Yeah.
And he worked at Goldman Sachs and so
Totally.
What do you what makes him like this? Do you have a sense of sort of why he is the way that he is? He's sort of a singular figure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think I have a couple of hypotheses. Yeah. One is what a number of the people I talked to told me that knew him. And I talked to over 100 people who crossed paths with him. So a good chunk of them, their thesis was he believes everything he says. Like, he's a lot. He is not really lying because he actually believes it. And you don't think that one? Okay. That's like the mental illness one. This is a good editor. Yeah. This is the like writer saying something a little over the top. Editor being like, that's not making it in. Yeah.
Well, you don't really make that argument.
No. Well, right. That's one thesis, right? The other one is more that he has this chip on his shoulder, and this was like the way he could rise up, and he kind of just kept scrabbling from one lie to the next, and it's a little bit of a like roller coaster. It's like once you're on, then you're on, and you can't get off.
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of the insights that I thought was really interesting in the book, and this is not to spoil anything, but you have like a riff about how all these famous con artists that we're familiar with kind of are creatures of their time and sort of their milieu. So like the guy, I forget his name now, but from Catch Me If You Can. Like,
Frank Abagnale.
Yeah, so he impersonates a Pan Am pilot because it's sort of the age where luxury jet travel becomes sort of like this aspirational thing, and Elizabeth Holmes goes to Silicon Valley for obvious reasons. Yeah. And meanwhile, Santos comes up, decides to run for Congress in the age of Donald Trump, another person who takes serial liberties with the truth. Right. So I'm curious sort of if you can sort of, if this is sort of a thread that sort of came up in your reporting, sort of the influence sort of that Trump had on him and sort of deciding to bring him into politics.
Yeah. Well, the other funny thing, I just remembered another person that I think is influenced by the time, another scammer, was Anna Delvey. Yeah. And I just remembered, I was like going back in my notes, and I remember that I talked to this one guy who claims that he went to a strip club with Santos, and that not that long before that, he also went to a club with Anna Delvey. So I was like, this is beautiful, these two people. But that I could totally not confirm, and this guy had other problems with him. So I did not put that in the book. But you guys can enjoy that little unconfirmed fact. No, but so Anna Delvey, like her own time, and I think Santos is running in this super political moment where politics is kind of the only game in town. And Santos becomes kind of enamored with Trump. And you can see this, the way his sort of social media changes. He's like only interested in Miley Cyrus and who has clear skin or not. Like it's just like celebrity and looks.
Ozempic.
He's exactly. With Ozempic. Oh my God, yeah. And then it shifts to politics, and it's, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Trump. The funny thing with Trump is that, AOC, he's kind of like a reply guy for. But with Trump, he kind of follows Trump around, or tries to, and goes to, he goes to like any event where a minor Trump White House figure is appearing at, and he'll put it on Facebook. And so I think he's like, you can again trace this through the social media. He's like learning from that world, and he's like, how do they conduct themselves? What do they do well?
But it also seems like, one of the arguments, or sort of one of the threads that I picked up was that like he's not necessarily someone with like real political beliefs, but rather like sees politics, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but like sees politics as a way sort of to basically get access to money, to rich people, to a lifestyle, sort of to a way of living sort of that he was trying to aspire to, but was struggling to do with sort of a variety of petty scams. Yeah,
I think that's the main part of it, and then there's also a piece of wanting to be in the spotlight and like the chase for fame. But yeah, I think a lot of it was he saw how much money you could divert in politics, which you really can.
Yeah. I mean, it's a commentary on that as much as him. You did a lot of reporting, as we know, in Brazil for the book. Where he spent sort of formative moments as a young man. What was it like to do that reporting? In particular, sort of you go deep into sort of the Rio drag community. What did you learn there, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was the most fun part of reporting the book, because I got to, I've floated in the past couple of years. I've floated like so many trips to my editors, and they all get shot down. It's always like, we don't have money for that. So finally I could do like a great trip. But I went with my wife, who's also a great reporter, and my daughter, who's not a reporter and not a particularly great traveler. She's 2 years old. But my favorite moment from it was, I found this whole process was like a process of tracking down anyone who knew Santos in Brazil. And then I basically just asked them to take me on a tour. I was like, okay, let's talk, and then walk me around to the places where you hung out with Santos. And that helped a lot, because it really kind of brought that world to light for me. But the key part, the best part was, there was this wondering about what did Santos really look like when he was dressing in drag and performing. We have a couple pictures, a couple videos, but we don't really, he has sort of credibly said, oh, those pictures and videos are all from the same event pretty much, and like, I didn't really do this much. So I had to figure it out. Like, what did it actually look like when he performed? So his drag mentor, who I spent a lot of time with, goes by the stage name Aola Rochard. And she said, I'm performing this Wednesday. Do you want to come? Actually, the first thing she said was, I'm having a birthday party at this club. Do you want to come to that? And then she canceled the birthday right before I got there. So I was like, this is the world you're living in with Santos. They're all a little out there. But so I go to I said, great, I would love to see you at the club. And my wife is like, I'm coming with you. So the two of us go to the club together. We get there and we realize it's not like a dance club, it's a sex club. And it's an unmarked door. And we walk in and the bouncer looks at her and says, like, no, like, get out, because women are not allowed, or people who look like women in street clothes. So she sadly went home to our daughter, and I went in. And you could, I write about this in the book.
That's trust, by the way.
Yeah, it's trust. It's trust. She left right before they handed me the wristband with the key on it that you could go into the room to have sex with someone. So that was, thank you. Yeah, cheers. I didn't do that, obviously. I went to the room where people were dancing, and I sat clutching a beer, really, like
nervously.
Yeah, I don't speak language. Everyone else had no clothes on. I had essentially like this. They were like, "What is this dude doing here?" Anyway, but it was kind of beautiful and clarifying because, there had been this idea of, oh, Santos dressing in drag, it's so like lurid, whatever. But when you actually see his mentor doing it, first these strippers come on basically, and they're like doing a sort of strip tease thing. And that was the whole show. And then the mentor comes on and it's totally different. It's this kind of show that's about like being beautiful and sort of lip syncing and singing and having fun, and I don't know, it was not exactly what I had expected, and it sort of clicked for me. I was like, oh, this is what Santos really liked. It was about sort of escape, release, reinvention, not necessarily about sex, and I think that kind of helps.
So Santos ultimately leaves Brazil like 2 steps ahead of the line.
Yeah,
and
literally.
It's part of sort of like this long arc of his career where like he goes places, he works places, he pulls off these like petty cons. People kind of know that something is up, but they never really seem to stop him. He never really seems to face any consequence. Why do you think that is? I mean, it was very apparent from the jump to his roommates, to everyone he worked with, that the guy was a scammer.
Totally. Well, I think, we all know a couple guys like this, right? Like, maybe not to this extent, but everyone has like that person. I was just talking to someone about this, like, and they were like, oh, it's X person. Everyone knows someone who lies a little bit more than they should, never pays you back for the dinner, and so it's not a totally uncommon personality type on the low level. The other thing too is that he kind of gravitates to these people who are also doing vaguely sketchy things. He's not like hanging out with the most up and up people in the world, which was an interesting part of reporting this because I had to separate their fact from fiction too. Like I couldn't take everything that his friends told me for face value either. So I think that that's part of it. But the main thing was that he was able to sort of, dodge these obstacles for a long time because he wasn't in Congress and he wasn't a politician when, people are really rigorous about making those obstacles higher. And so that to me is the interesting psychological question with him is like, why politics? Which the book tries to answer.
So, also as like a former daily newspaper columnist in New York, I mean, that the area that he grew up in, sort of the community, sort of, you described New York in a very sort of sophisticated and nuanced way. What role do you think sort of that environment had in kind of making him the way that he is?
Yeah, I think that is where the chip on the shoulder piece comes from. Because Brazil, to me, and to as this is what his friends say, was this place where he could go and be someone different, and no one really knew who he was. He had entree to that world, but no kind of restrictions. So that was like this paradise for him. New York is a paradise, I think, but it was a restrictive one for him, and he kept banging up against all the problems of New York, like economic inequality and public schools that are not as great as they should be sometimes. And he clearly had ambition early on. Like, I talked to a teacher of his who remembers Santos. I think this was in middle school. Remembering Santos kind of come up and ask after class, like, what can I do to get better? So this was sort of deeply ingrained in him, and I think that that's part of how New York shaped him.
It's also interesting, sort of the point you make, how New York in 2022, when he got elected, you don't think of New York State this way, but it was actually sort of a hotbed of conservative activism.
Oh, yeah.
And that's sort of the conditions of the race, as much as anything else, were the thing that actually carried him into Congress.
Yeah, it was this serious red wave. And it's, funny to kind of look at it nationally, where there was not, that red wave did not exist. And there's tons of reasons for it, but part of it is this kind of percolating, like the slow percolation of culture into politics, that it took a while for like the reaction against certain democratic impulses to hit the political sphere. And in New York, that happened big time in 22. And I think we haven't seen the end of it, by the way. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned also sort of like the obviously it being a strange choice to be a con man who seeks out the scrutiny of national politics, and obviously the risks that ultimately paid off here. Why do you think that he was willing sort of to go through with this?
I know. That is the central psychological question. I think part of it is because he kept being not found out. He had this one really revealing answer to me on a podcast. It was kind of a throwaway question. The question wasn't even about this, but for some reason he said, I know what it was. He was complimenting Tom Suozzi, his Democratic opponent in 2020, the guy who beat him. And he was complimenting him by saying, like, oh, Suozzi was kind of like a, up and up guy. Like, he didn't like throw mud at me, And to me, that was interesting because, like, I wonder if he expected Suozzi to, like, find all this out and, like, dig into him. And the fact that his first opponent didn't and he slipped through, I think then he was like, oh, I could do this. I made a lot of money. I could make even more. Let's go,
Well, so who's responsible for allowing him to slip through in 2022?
In 22,
yeah.
So many people. I mean, it's like, it was like a perfect storm. There's a lot. Reporters should have uncovered more of this, myself included. And I wrote a lot of critical things about him, and so did other reporters. But we all had little pieces of it. And the key problem, I think, was we didn't sort of connect all the dots and say, oh, it's not like there's a few weird things about this guy. Everything is weird about this guy. So that was part of it. And of course, the political system, both parties did not do the vetting that they should have.
Yeah, I mean, but I was also struck sort of reading the book. Like, I had always thought that just, the D-Trip was asleep at the switch. And his opponents sort of just didn't know they didn't have the resources to develop all this. But they sort of did. Like, they had all the pieces were visible and nobody put it all together. And his opponent ran a campaign that was largely about abortion and Santos's ties to January 6th. Instead of saying, hey, you might not want to elect a person who appears to be a complete con man.
Yeah.
They just didn't do it.
And I mean, I think that opponent had a sense that something was off here. He was not either totally asleep at the wheel. He kind of knew that the guy was sketchy, but he didn't do it. He didn't know how to kind of tell that story, I guess. And it is hard. It's a tough story to tell. I mean, it's funny, though, the way that little things could have been different. The D-Trip report, which is extensive and like kind of fun reading in a weird way, the one thing it didn't get was the colleges, the fake colleges. And I think that kind of crystallizes it for normal people. It's like, oh, you lied about you lied about your degree, like you're a liar, And the fact, I wonder what would have happened if they had made that call to NYU.
So speaking of the fake colleges, I mean, you catalog so many lies in the book. Do you have a favorite?
Favorite lie? I mean, the 24 weeks gestation to me is just so funny. It's just like so weird. Yeah, I mean, the Baruch volleyball is fun too.
He claimed, by the way, that he played so much volleyball that he had a double knee replacement
Yes.
at 20 years old.
That's the
I mean,
fun
it's just
part.
like the eccentricity, the
yeah,
detail.
the
of the
detail. I
lie.
mean, he's an incredible writer.
Right.
You know,
He
Yeah.
commits. He
Yeah.
commits to the bit.
He totally
Yeah.
commits to the bit. Yeah.
So he comes to DC. He managed to get through. Before he actually is sworn in, the Times drops this story, and then sort of the bottom all falls out. But he still comes in. Who was he, if anyone, was he close with in DC? Did he have like a tribe in the Republican conference? Were there people that he was close to, relied upon, or was he just sort of a solo?
Yeah, so he was a little solo. He's a little bit of a lone wolf, but he does make friends with this kind of far right group. Not even the Freedom Caucus, but kind of the Freedom Caucus. And it was funny. I was like fact checking this detail of whether he was friends with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and he was. Like, there's this kind of social media evidence of them like joking around and giving presents to each other and stuff. And I think that she's someone who he's kind of connected with in a way. And that's been a pretty lasting bond. I mean, if you look at the legislative record, such as it is for Santos, he basically, either votes with or co-sponsors the legislation with this kind of far-right Freedom Caucus-y group. And I think we're really going to see, it's going to be super interesting on Friday whether that's enough to save him. I feel like the reporting has swung in different directions, and right now we're at actually he might last moment, but we'll see. Yeah.
For those in the room who may be like curious about sort of the process that went into this book, the both reporting and writing process, and the creation sort of a book-length work of narrative journalism, can you talk about? I mean, you mentioned sort of speaking to more than 100 sources.
Yeah.
You mentioned going to Brazil, but I think folks may be curious about sort of what the process of reporting the
Totally.
book was like.
I mean, it was so quick. I started March 1st, and I turned in the draft on, I guess it was around like mid-July. Which was crazy. There was a moment where for a lot of that time, I was writing a chapter a week, which is not, I don't recommend it as a, as a way to write a book. 'Cause I was like writing for 5 days and then doing like the leftover reporting for 2 days. It was crazy. But I'm very lucky. I have a great family who is doing a lot of childcare, luckily for me, my wife and my parents who are here. My in-laws, so that helped. Also, Rosie sat on my lap for a lot of it while I was typing.
So that was the key.
Fun.
That was the key to the writing process.
That was the writing process. Yeah. I mean, it was like I don't have much time, so I have to keep writing. But yeah, I do. Susan nicely mentioned my fiction background, and I did kind of think of this. I tried to structure it. I tried to do the writing in the way I do my fiction writing, which is like sit down and just write for X amount of time. And sort of don't get distracted, don't like stop and look at the page, like just keep writing and fix it in editing.
Oh, that's interesting. I've heard like fiction writers have all sorts of crazy techniques they use not to sort of get sucked down the rabbit hole of the internet. That you disconnect, like lock yourself in a room.
Yeah, I use it's so simple. It's just on Microsoft Word. There's like a focus function, and it just like blocks everything out. And so I used a lot of that.
Was there? I asked sort of about your favorite lie, but was there sort of a scoop in the book of which there sort of are many that you uncovered that you were like particularly struck by?
Yeah, I was fascinated by his family. And so I loved the fact that a couple of family members told me this, he had this thing going where he would mooch off his grandmother in Brazil. And I went to she's an elderly woman. I went to the church that she would go to every day. She was the doorman at her building who I talked to said she went to church every day. And I was like, I love that detail. Even this woman he's stealing from, And so it was just like the commitments to stealing from his family members. The grandmother, his Aunt Elma, who, by the way, there's 2 people who are responsible for him staying out of jail right now, which is his dad and his Aunt Elma, who signs the bond agreement for him. And these are immigrants who like have worked like really serious, like they've worked really hard to like build a life here. And he is relying on them, people he's stolen from, to stay out of jail, which is I couldn't believe it.
Speaking of jail, assuming that we're about to have seen the last of him as a New York City congressman, what's next for him? What is sort of the process of the next few months, sort of leading up to the trial, look like? What is he facing? What sort of is on the horizon? For him?
So one open-ended question is whether he takes a plea deal. I think the sort of conventional wisdom would be that once he's out of Congress, he has even less leverage in going to prosecutors. So one would think that if he is kicked out, that he would just kind of have to go to trial. I guess that would make sense. The trial is supposed to be in September. Hilariously, it's not any earlier because the judge said that people don't show up for jury duty in the summer. So it's our fault that George Santos is it's taking so long. But so then that trial will happen. I can't remember exactly. I think they said about a month that it'd take, and then it's a case that has a lot of paper in it, and it's going to be hard for him to argue that he didn't do a lot of these things. So that's coming up, and then he'll be away for some years. I don't think that it'll be the 100 that Sam Bankman-Fried got, but it'll be some time. Then he gets out, which is my favorite part because this is just to bring it back to me for a second. This has been a question I've written about a little bit, and I wrote this essay about what does he do next. And one of the things I floated was Dancing with the Stars. And I said that not just as a joke, but partially because of his background that I've been reporting on and loving celebrity and entertainment, etc. So he, a Brazilian reporter who he does talk to, reached him when the book came out and said, Mark Chiusano is saying this about you, that you're going to do Dancing with the Stars. And he responds to that reporter saying no, I'll never do that. I'm going to go work for an NGO and be out of the spotlight. That's way too trashy for me. And then he pauses for a second and he's like, but if the money is good, I might have to do shit like that. So it's okay.
Yeah, just perfect.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to give everybody a chance to get their crack at you, so maybe we'll throw it open for some audience questions. But really, I can't recommend the book enough. Really, really terrific. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much. So yeah, if there's any questions, right? How do we? We could vamp too. I got another tight 10 if we need it.
Just quickly, do we know which New York Met it was that?
Oh my!
Which New York?
Yeah, which New York Met it was
Okay.
that the season was doomed by the Santos?
I do know, and I'm a Met fan. So let me tell people the story. So
by the way,
yeah.
I swear this is on my list of questions. I decided it was too parochial, and I'm deeply grateful to you, sir, because I'm a Met fan as well.
Yeah. So this is a great video. I almost don't want to. I wish we had a thing we could just show it, but everyone should go to your phones later and watch this video of its opening day of this terrible Met season to come, 2023, and to sort of greet them. Santos, by the way, Mets are in his district. It's partially Queens district. So Santos posts this video of him in a goofy Mets jersey, and he's like, good luck on the season, Mets. And then he does the Let's Go Mets chant, which, does anyone know the Let's Go Mets chant? What is it? Thank you. Yeah, it's Let's Go Mets, Everyone knows that, even if you're not a Mets fan. It's in the ethos.
His version is so hilariously off key.
I don't even want to.
Blew up my Mets text chains for days, and everyone said, "Well, we're doomed now.
We're doomed.
And it was a running joke among Mets fans.
It was a running joke among Mets fans, and then I was told by a source who would know that at least one Met believes that video ruins the Mets season.
But you have to spill it now.
I can't. I love the Mets too much, and I can't do it. Yeah. It's a real Met, though. I will say that. It's not like some people I tweeted this, and some people were like, oh, is it a utility guy? No, it's a Met. It's a New York Met. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to get this.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Actually, I'm fascinated by the chapter where he's working at that call center. Can you talk, how did he end up there? It seems like it's sort of not on the trajectory.
Totally. Yeah, the question about how Santos for a while worked at a call center in Queens, and how did he get there, and kind of what was the trajectory there. This is kind of how I started the book, was Santos at this call center. And I was fascinated with this particular moment because it's kind of it's like the first job out of college for him. He didn't go to college, but this was his kind of like, this was his like kind of, I'm an adult now and I have a job, first job more or less. And it also seems to be, as far as, people I've talked to have told me, it seems to be his kind of last real job, kind of straightforward job that we think of as a regular job. He's done lots of other kind of gigs and he's done lots of scamming and kind of part-time things, but this was like a job. Like, you got to show up at 9 and leave at 5, whatever. So I was interested with, like, why did he do it so briefly? What was this, what was his life like there? And so I went to, I talked to a lot of people who knew him then. And I also went to this place, which is this very like dreary, dusty corner of New York City. And you could kind of see like very quickly why you wouldn't want to spend your life there. It's a call center with like, it's like it's a blocky cube. And I went there and I was struck like immediately by how dusty the windows are. And I talked to a woman who said, yeah, they're covered by soot all the time because there's a fuel depot right next to the place. And so it's just like everything about this place. There was nowhere to eat. You'd have to like get in your car. He didn't really drive. Supposedly he took the bus to get there. It was like not a fun place. And so I kind of could see him like deciding, I don't want to do this. This is not how I want to spend my life. And his colleagues at the time told me he just was lying to them all the time. And eventually he leaves. He leaves, very interestingly, right as he's about to marry a woman. And various roommates of his told me that he married her for money, and that this kind of gave him the money to stop doing this regular job. So to me, it's the moment that he goes from normal person to scammer in a big way.
Does he still talk with you? Is he willing to?
Yeah. The question is, does Santos still talk to me? Absolutely not. Someone said to me that, what if he shows up today? I was like, that would be hilarious. I didn't even think about that. That is, yeah, I don't think he's here. No, he talked to me a lot he would answer my queries when I was writing for the paper. Then when I got the book deal to write about him, he tweeted something like, it's on the back of the book, but that, congratulations to Mark, who I've had blocked for a year. He blocked me on Twitter. And so no, this is the great thing about Santos, is that he was so clear from the beginning that he wasn't going to help, which is totally fine. I get it. It's his prerogative. I didn't need him to talk to me, to be honest. But I called him, to give him the benefit of the doubt and to say, here's what I'm doing, here's what I've learned. I called him many times. And one time he picked up. I called from a different phone number, and he picked up. And he's like kind of yelling at me and like, criticizing me, whatever. Then he hangs up. And then he calls back 1 minute later. And he's like, and another thing, and it's just like, he keeps going. It's like my recorder is on, I'm like not an idiot. And he just keeps talking. And then I text him and he texts back. So he kind of can't help himself, But he didn't tell me anything interesting because he wants to kind of keep his story for himself.
In part 2, given that they're going to vote tomorrow, do you think that with his personality, he will start talking about Congress and...
Like sort of spilling the tea. Yeah. The question is like, once he does, if he is voted out and whenever that happens, will he kind of feel released to, criticize other members of Congress, which he's been threatening to do. He's been saying, they aren't who you think they are. He's had that's a sort of typical tone for Santos, where he's very kind of apocalyptic and dark, these dark kind of portentous, allegations that rarely touch specifics. So if his past, is any guide, I don't think he's going to say much specific. But we'll see. This is a bigger obstacle than he's ever faced. So I do wonder if he's got, if he'll start just sort of flaming people because he has nothing else left. Yeah. Oh, you can come to the mic if you want, but also no rush. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm very interested. You kind of frame it as George's story, but it's in the larger American backdrop to the biggest fabulist we've had. I mean, 30,000 lies, and they still are pouring out, and it's at the top of the game for the Republican Party. So is this kind of, does it give you any thoughts about where is American politics going towards, and what is the lie, and how dangerous is it for political rise in America? In fact, it seems some people rise because they are effectively lying continuously.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that what's interesting to me about Trump and Santos is that if you kind of step back a little, you can sort of understand how Trump would be so successful, right? He is a person who is not as rich as he said he is, but he certainly has money. He certainly is famous. He has a TV program that, millions of Americans watched and loved and think that he is a very successful businessman, right? So it makes sense. He's got a lot of built-in things. He's a good entertainer, right? Like these are sort of skills that help in politics. What's interesting to me is that a liar in the Trump vein, like Santos, could be so successful without any of those structural advantages. And that, to me, is, in a strange way, even scarier than, that we've gone even beyond the sort of Trump winning problem. That now you can have someone who's lying and doing all these kind of scheming things that Santos has done and still win office when you're sort of a lower level figure than Trump.
I have a related question. Santos is...
The mic is great. Love mics.
Hi, Mark. So Santos is a singular figure in a lot of ways, but he's also representative, I think, of a broader rot in American politics and culture. In the crafting of the book, how did you weigh that? How did you wrestle with whether to zoom out? How narrow did you stay? I haven't read the book yet, sorry, but I will. How did you make those decisions as a writer and as a storyteller and as a reporter?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I totally agree. It's that's what sort of drew me to this project in the first place, was that he himself, it's this kind of two-pronged thing. He himself is so interesting and so kind of outside the normal bounds, right, of American politics, and he's so kind of fascinating. I mean, I just remembered the stat today that there's been, over 11,000 members of Congress in history, right? And he's like one of 5 that's going to be, expelled. It's just, he's so different. So there's that. And that's like why I think focusing on him. But he comes from this deep well of this deep tradition in America of, kind of every man comes to Washington and makes good but like in this kind of darker way, right? And he and so I think that he is like, he is sui generis in a way, but couldn't have happened in any other country, So yeah, I tried to toggle as much as I could. I stay pretty close to him as a person, like to make it almost like I was thinking a lot of Catch Me If You Can while I was writing this book, and also The Great Gatsby. Like, I think there's an arc to this, but I do sort of pull back a little bit, especially in like New York politics and what was going on in New York at the time, because I think also that is very different than what was happening around the country.
Well, if I can just jump in really quickly, but just to speak to sort of the broader rot, like one of the things that I thought was really striking in the book was the way that sort of you wove together sort of the national threads with also the local ones. I mean, I think one of my favorite chapters was the one about, was it Nancy Marks?
Yes.
So, like, would you talk a little bit about Nancy and sort of the way that, like, the grift is not always just sort of like in the national spotlight, this sort of the sense that, like, everybody is doing it everywhere at every level all the time?
Yeah, so Nancy Marks was his campaign treasurer who pled guilty to some behavior affiliated with Santos. and some. And she is this fascinating, strange figure from a place called Shirley, Long Island, which is basically like near the Hamptons, but it could not be farther from the Hamptons. Like if you like compare the two places. And it's like kind of, it's like a mini tragedy. I think that's what was funny about this book. There was always these like nested tragedies, the like Trump, this like sort of craziness of Trump in America, the craziness of Santos, the craziness of Nancy Marks in Shirley. She, like, her husband dies. He was a law enforcement guy, and he dies from cancer, and she kind of has this big family and needs to make money, and had always been kind of doing this small time political grift, like where you'd have companies that do a little something for a candidate and maybe you charge a little more than you should, that kind of thing, like making a living. And then Santos comes around, and it's at the exact moment where she needs the money, and the grift just gets supercharged. And so the way Santos tells it, it was all her. The way she tells it, it was all Santos. Or not quite all Santos, but they definitely helped each other, and they became sort of partners in grift. One tiny little thing. How much money? I mean, that was the other funny thing about this, is that it's not that much money. It's not like billions of dollars. She was making like a good upper middle class living, from the grift. And again, it raises the question of like, why, But I think, again, that also raises the question of how hard it is to make a living in America. And there's this kind of bizarro picture of the American dream, I think, in the book, where, that's what Santos wanted. He wanted to be a success. He wanted to be wealthy and famous, and that's the American dream. But he couldn't get there through sort of traditional and legal means, and so he started kind of conning and stealing to get there. Other questions? Yeah.
I know your book came out 24 hours ago.
Yeah.
With, now that there's like more full accounting of his lies that might not have been available to voters prior to the election, like, did you speak to constituents? Do they feel like they got defrauded? Do they even care?
Yeah.
It's like obviously the New York congressional part, like folks are trying to get him expelled, but like is that the greater sentiment among voters?
Yeah. So question about kind of the voters and whether like what they feel about Santos now, like now that all these lies came out. What I wanted to do in the book was do a chapter that was kind of all voters who were angry at him. And a funny thing happened, which is that you can't find that many. Like there are people who are super angry, who are like Democrats, obviously, and there are Republicans who are like very worried that he's going to kind of drag them down, and they're angry. But there's a lot of people that just weren't really following it, and it's like not their fault. There wasn't that much about him, right? So it's a tricky question. I think that it would have been fascinating to see him run again, because I wonder what would have happened. I think that there would have been a small but significant cohort that would have still voted for him, even with all this. The kind of like very skeptical section of the electorate that he might have retained. Well, I don't think we're going to see that.
Yeah, I'm doing the math in my head of how many congressional districts I think that he could win today.
Today, yeah, I know. It's not insignificant.
It's not insignificant, I think.
Yeah, I think that this district is not quite red enough for that, but other parts of Long Island, however. Yeah.
You said that you think George Santos couldn't happen in another country. What do you think that is, and if you think there's something particularly American about George Santos?
Yeah, could George Santos? Why couldn't Santos happen in another country? And is there something American about him? Now that I said that, I'm wondering about Brazil, honestly, because he learned a lot from Brazilian politicians. His family is very pro-Bolsonaro. He has been kind of affiliated with the Bolsonaro movement. So there is something there. And there is even a bizarre, like, cross-partisan Lula similarity in a way. Lula is the liberal, current president. in that Lula, there's this great detail of Lula was a union guy, and he, kind of working class guy, and he comes to. It's said that the first time he came to the Capitol and realized that there were like essentially no working class representation in government, that's when he was like, I got to come into, I got to run for office. And I do think there's something like that with Santos too, of like, well, why can't, if these people could do it, why can't I do it? But I do think that there's an Americanness in the love that he's received after all his cons, and in the kind of the way that he was able to, like we were talking about before, just kind of jump over all these obstacles. In few other countries could you have these second acts, I think, and he's had so many second acts already. Other things? I'm trying to think of my fun Santos facts these days. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about his look? How he thinks about his look and how important his look is to him?
Yeah. This is kind of how I started the book, with kind of Santos looking at himself in the mirror, because I do think that is a lot. That sort of says a lot about his mentality. He's obsessed with the way he looks and is often trying to sculpt his looks, whether through liposuction or Ozempic or lap band surgery or lip filler. And I think that it is sort of, what's funny to me is that he never looked that bad, and his friends always found him as a very kind of fun, buoyant guy. He's said to be like basically a good hang, and so it's like, what is making you do this? And I think there is a real deep insecurity that is kind of push the engine for a lot of this. He's also very tall in a funny way. People don't think that. They think, yeah, he's a tall man. It's like over 6 feet. Yeah.
So 3 years in prison. That's the time for your third act, a
Yeah.
tell-all book. You could be co-authoring with him.
I know. I'm gonna be ghostwriting his book. The way journalism is going these days. Yeah.
Buy the book.
It's gonna be
please,
me
so we
and
don't-
yeah. Please buy the book, so I don't have to be sitting here with George
that's depressing,
in 3 years. Yeah. I don't think he'd have me. He was said to be very angry when I started writing the book, in part because he thought that it took away from him telling his life story and getting money and Netflix deals for it. So, sorry, George.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, and Alex, for just a fantastic event and a great way to wind up the events for this year. Let's give Mark a round of applause.
Thank you so much.